I think daytimers needs their own classroom full of lazy boys.
Lazy boys. I think you all have enough help sleeping with me teaching as it is. So we'll.
See, we've talked to Justin, see if he can just order a bunch.
Yeah.
Cheap ones.
I am grateful to Justin for this chair.
Yeah, that's
It really works for me. Yeah. I'd much rather sit than stand.
Yeah.
Almost there. We're online.
To their store to make it. Had to kill 30 minutes or something between meeting people or whatever. Go hang out with Comptons, look at their fishing stuff.
Yeah.
Where's that at over to?
It's in Palmyra now.
Oh, I thought they were over, not St. Joe, where was it where we saw Compton's? Back a year ago.
Smithville used to have a Compton store. I don't know if they still do. We used to go by on the way to the airport.
Well, that's where we saw it when we went to the airport. One year.
It's been the one in Palmyra where Justin and the Macon one pretty much moved to.
We don't go to either place. We don't go in. Other than Columbia is our big deal. We got out. Thank heavens, since gas is getting higher, it makes a difference.
Yep.
Even in my Fiesta, I'm asking myself, do I really need to take this trip? Man alive.
I was thinking about getting a moped and driving to Macon.
Told Carrie you might become a long distance cyclist before long. So.
You do that.
She's always wanted a motorcycle, and I'm like, well, we can get one without a motor. You know?
Got the cycle down.
Yeah. Maybe a sailboat on wheels. I don't know.
Electric motor on each wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
It looks like it, in the advertising, looks like it lost power, trailers, and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. I've seen those at like Bass Pro, and you can actually take those on your conservation, like hiking trails and everything. You can take those; they're like $5,000. So yeah, Chris and I were thinking about getting them for duck hunting, get a little trailer on it. Then we saw the price, like, oh, never mind. I was thinking like $800.
Luke has an electric scooter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I see him riding that thing all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, he already wore one out, so I told him, this one's on you. Or after this one, it's on you, so take care of it.
There's been a couple of famous people that got seriously injured on those.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, we got the one that I think it's limited to 8 miles an hour, so that wouldn't be any faster than a bicycle. So, yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're just waiting on Karen.
Yeah.
That's fine. No big deal. We're doing fine on time. So we're in John chapter 2, though, if you do want to go there, if you're not already there. Is 5th and 6th grade camp this coming Sunday? Yeah, Luke's going to that.
Good. Yeah, Luke, Peyton, and Ava.
Oh, good. Good. Okay. Good.
Yeah, we have some in 5th and 6th, a couple in junior high. None in high school, though, so that's
Okay.
pretty common.
Yeah.
Although, I was looking at the roster sheet, they actually have Lane Stuckey down for 5th and 6th instead of Luke.
Yeah, I put in the wrong name.
Oh, you
They're-
did that? Okay.
They're so similar. In my mind, they're just interchangeable.
Okay, all right.
They're 10 years apart and they're the same person.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Luke's a little more book smart, but that's about it. I mean, personality-wise, they are.
Do you want me to correct that and I call someone? Or
Yeah, that'd be good.
Because
Yeah.
Luke would be so mad being called Lane.
Actually, I call him Lane all the time,
Okay.
especially when he makes me mad.
From the very beginning, we're
Yep.
putting into groups. Lane, Stucky.
He's like, stop calling me that. And I said, well, you've got a choice. You can be like one of two older brothers. Make your choice. Right now, you're acting like Lane. Now, Lane's come a long way, but Lane at 10 years old was like that. So, just, yeah.
My grandmother, she had like 6 kids. And when she got older, they buy her little, she called them whatnots, to pick up wherever places they'd gone. And she'd be pointing something out. She'd say, Howard gave you that. I mean Albert. I mean Delmer. I mean Lloyd.
So she got the right one.
Yeah, we had to choose 2 4-letter names that start with L. Just,
Yeah, that was a mistake.
It was.
You should have picked some different first letters.
yeah.
I called mine all starting with a J, and I would never do that again.
Right. Right. Yeah, Luke was, we thought Luke was a girl at first, so we were going to call him Pearl. And Al, to this day, calls him Pearl because we told Al that. So, yeah.
That's great.
It is pretty funny. All right, I think we're ready to go. We are in John chapter 2. And this is a famous story you've probably heard several times, but there's always something new to learn from Scripture if we let our mind be open and try. So that'll be the goal here today. So let's start reading John chapter 2, and let's do verses 1 through 4.
On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come."
Okay, thank you, Alex. In the majority of cultures, for the majority of time, to come to a wedding, you need to be invited. They're not typically public events. They're typically private events. Now, compare that to a funeral. The only reason why I'm comparing those two is because as a preacher, you officiate one or the other. Weddings or funerals. Funerals tend to be public events. They're publicly advertised and anybody can come. Well, here, Jesus is obviously invited to a wedding. It says there in verse 2. And in order to be invited to a wedding, you'd either have to be family or a close friend. And so these were people who knew Jesus and his disciples well. Now, this is very early on in Jesus' ministry. So they've already built a network of friends and family over time who love them. Because also weddings in that era were very expensive. We tend to get on people today for expensive weddings, but to be honest, in a lot of cultures, for a lot of time, that's where the big expense was in family history. It was weddings. Jewish weddings could be up to 10 days long. And that's not uncommon, even to this day, in some places. Only in America have we shortened everything to an hour or less. Now I like that as much as the rest of you, but at the same time, it's uncommon. If you go to church in some other country, 2, 3, 4 hours all day long is not uncommon. Weddings tend to be much longer. The shortest wedding I have done since being the preacher of this church was literally 3 minutes. And that was it was on the same day as Scott and Dee's wedding, if you all remember Scott and Dee's wedding. Well, theirs wasn't until later in the afternoon, and so the church was already decorated, nobody was there, and a couple called me, and they said, "We want to get married today, but we can't find anybody. Will you do it?" And I was like, "Okay, I got time." So they showed up, and we used Scott and Dee's decorations.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah, it was already there, set up, ready to go.
Any leftover food?
And it was kind of a fun story. They were high school sweethearts, and then they parted, and they both married and had families, and their spouses had died late in life. They were both in their 70s, and they got back together, and I married him. And he was still driving the same 54 Chevy he was in high school. And then about 2 years ago, or no, right before the pandemic, so about 3 years ago, they showed up to church one Sunday just to say hi. So that was fun. Yeah. So that's the shortest wedding I ever did because it was literally vows and rings. I threw in a prayer to make an extra 30 seconds. And my children were the witnesses. I don't even know if that's legal, but it happened. So, but this is definitely not that. This is an elaborate wedding, family, friends invited, probably multiple days long. And so the expense was very, very high. The average wedding today, this will blow your mind because it blows my mind. The average wedding today is nearing $30,000. Yeah. And
Depends on what you're.
right, but people just go to the extremes. Now, what's ironic is the science shows, the data shows that the less elaborate a wedding you have, the longer the marriage lasts. So I think some people just want to get married, but they don't want to stay married. You know, whereas if your focus is on the marriage instead of the ceremony,
Yes.
yeah, that makes a big difference. So, but in this culture, this was normal. And so what had happened at this wedding, as you all know, I almost said funeral. What happened at this wedding, as you all know, is that it says the wine ran out. Now, this is a contentious word in Scripture, the word wine. Every English translation renders it wine and not grape juice. It's the Greek word oinos, and it can mean either one. That's the fun thing about that word. It can mean grape juice, or it can mean fermented grape juice or wine. And I'm not going to get into a big spiel over it because people tend to have very strong opinions either direction. And the reason why I'm also not going to get into it is because the passage itself doesn't make a big deal about it other than they ran out. Like, that's the problem. It was expected and it ran out. And so this is a problem. And the reason why it's a problem because the wine was supposed to represent the marriage continuing over time. So over the course of the wedding ceremony, they were supposed to have never-ending wine to represent a never-ending marriage. It was considered bad luck, superstitious, to run out of wine in the middle of your wedding because it would mean that your marriage wouldn't last. So this was considered culturally shameful to run out of wine. Probably what happened is they simply made a miscalculation and they just didn't order enough. Or, Grandpa was being cheap. I don't know. But anyway, let's keep reading here. Let's do verses 5 through 7.
Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim.
Okay. Thank you, Barb.
That's been a lot of wine there.
That's a lot of wine. Yeah. That's a lot of people. Now, I've always found this exchange between Jesus and his mother a little strange on the surface. Because Mary says to Jesus, "They have no wine." And Jesus' response is, "Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." Now, it is a little pretentious of Mary to make it Jesus' problem, but at the same time, who else was going to solve this problem?
Makes me wonder what he had already done.
Right.
Who he could solve.
That's true.
And that's what's so interesting, is that it's considered the first recorded miracle. I'm glad that was the point I was trying to bring out, so good job. It's the first recorded miracle, but it would be very strange if it was the first miracle whatsoever, because otherwise how would Mary know that he could do something about this? It's one thing to be told your son can render miracles. It's another thing to witness it and then be like, wow, okay, so he really can, And remember, at the end of the book of John, John writes that if everything Jesus had said or done was written, it would fill the books of the world. So there's lots of things we're not told. Remember that Scripture is sufficient, but it's not comprehensive. It tells us everything we need to know, but it doesn't tell us everything. And Deuteronomy 29:29 says the secret things belong to God. So there's things that were never recorded, and there's things we should not know. And the older I get, the more I am fine with not knowing certain things. So they have this exchange, and it's a little strange because Jesus' initial response seems to indicate, this isn't my problem, and I'm not going to do anything about it. Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Well, something that hits me with this, I'm thinking, here, you're preparing food for them with, telling how many people, and you've run out of something. We all panic, when that happens. I mean, that's important right then, because
Right.
it's a wedding. You've got to have enough food.
Right.
And I can see why, maybe she thought because Jesus, she just knew that they were miracles that he performed. Maybe she just knew he'd know where to go get some. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I can see where you're coming from.
But
Yeah.
I do know that's the thinking I think of, knowing women, and I'm sure women today are not different than they were then.
No.
We're all
No.
pretty much alike.
And I don't care how much culture changes, in the end, those things aren't going to change. You know, and that's to be expected. Hey, Tim. So, when Jesus says, "My hour has not yet come," you can read all the commentaries you want, every preacher's opinion you want, and I think it can drive you a little crazy because everybody's got a different interpretation. But one thing you can say for sure is that Jesus was not, what's a good way to put this? He wasn't trying to make a show of it. You know, like most of his miracles were done in the open. Can you think of another miracle that was done in private? I can think of one. It's kind of a deep cut question here. You may not know it. That's okay. Can you think of another miracle Jesus did that was in private? The one I thought of is when Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law, because that was done just in the home, you know, just then. So, you know, most of them were done publicly. And so Jesus seems to be reluctant about doing anything public. And so even though he does, as we know, solve this problem for them, he does not openly take credit for it. Which is really amazing, because if there's one being, one entity in the entire universe we're supposed to give credit to, who is it? God. And even Jesus here is not interested in that in the moment.
Can you imagine like the Messiah being revealed at your wedding? Like all the attention would be to him.
And, you know, that's a good way of thinking about it, because, you know, it's their special day, and even Jesus doesn't want to take the spotlight off of them.
Yeah.
You know, that's, you know, one of the words you don't often think of when it comes to God is the word considerate, but he is. You know, this is Jesus saving someone's face, saving embarrassment. If somebody had made the wrong miscalculation, you know there'd be some people in the family who would be like, well, they deserve to be embarrassed. Well, Jesus didn't have that attitude. Something to think about, isn't it? All right. And then his response, or his mother's response to the servants is, whatever he says to you, do it. It's obvious that she has some authority at this wedding, and that she believes he's going to do something. I think this is faith on Mary's part, because she can't actually tell Jesus what to do, and she knows it here. He's already over 30 years old, so in the Jewish culture, at 30 years old, you are a man, and you are not subject to authorities outside of the government and the local Jewish authorities. And so he here is showing grace, is the best way I know how to put it. And then we talked about how they filled the water pots. And these contain 20 or 30 gallons each. Now, anybody here, I'm sure you do know, how much does a gallon of water weigh? 8 pounds. About 8 pounds, yeah. So 20 times 8 is 160. And 30 times 8 is 240 pounds. That's a lot of water. And also keep in mind, they did not have a faucet there. It'd be enough of a pain in the butt to fill something that big with a faucet. But imagine you had to go get the water.
How would they carry?
Buckets with sticks coming out from their shoulders.
Oh,
About 6-7 gallons at a time, typically. You think how much water the average household uses in a month. Imagine carrying that all the time. I remember Marie Miller in the nursing home told me that she did not have running water in her house until the 1970s.
I know.
Which means she was nearing 60 years old by the time she had running water in her house. Yeah, I cannot imagine. I mean,
My parents did not have running water in the house till after Kenny and I were married.
wow.
We put the water in.
You know,
We didn't have water in our house. We rented a house here in town. It had a hand pump on the sink, one of those little ones that you could pump. We had no bathroom. We had an outhouse.
When you first got married?
here in town.
No kidding.
Yeah,
Wow.
and my grandparents didn't have a bathroom until the strip mine bought their farm and they moved just a mile north of Jacksonville. And they had never had water in the house until they moved there. And they did have water in the house. They didn't have a bathroom until, I don't know, 10, 15 years later, my dad put in water.
Wow.
They had a deep well.
Wow.
So around here, that wasn't totally uncommon.
My very first trip to Macon County, I've all told you the story. I showed up at Concord Church on January 3rd, 2002, and I asked where the bathroom was, and Marie Miller said, outside.
It's still out there.
Yeah. And I was like, outside? She's like, yes, outside. And I went outside, and there's an outhouse with not even a hole in the ground. It's just
Still not a hole in the ground.
still not a hole in the ground.
They used to have ever so often down in their basement, a snake would show up down there. I think it was probably.
There was a snake who bit Marie Miller while she was playing the piano on Sunday.
I
What?
heard she told me that
Oh, my.
snakes-
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And half the time the old oil burning furnace wouldn't work. So during the winter time we were froze for Christ, as we call it, and the preacher was real short. So
Oh, you like cool weather.
do what?
Oh, you like cool weather.
I do, they don't. And I wanted to stay employed. So yeah. No, I was fine. But yep, good times. Well, anyway, so filling these 20 or 30 gallons, this would have taken a while. So they've already ran out of wine. I want you to think about this. And now they have to go fill these water pots. So you can imagine the discomfort of Mary and the hostess and the family who's putting on the wedding is growing by the minute. And all Mary can tell them is, I asked Jesus to help us. I don't know what's going to happen. And they didn't have any other answers either. So the wedding guests here don't have any wine. Now, one other thing I will tell you about wine, when you look at it, like I was reading about ancient understandings of this word, and there's a lot of opinions, but the objective information I could get is that almost all drinking water even had a little bit of alcohol in it, and that was because that was the only way they knew how to keep it safe. So, for example, on sailing ships, they would serve the sailors beer the entire time they sailed. Well, it's not beer as we see it and understand it now. That word just used to mean water with a little bit of alcohol in it to keep it sterile. That was the only way they knew how to keep it safe. Right. I mean, if you have a gallon of water with a 0.5% volume alcohol, good luck getting drunk on that. It's just not going to happen. Okay. And so that could be all this is it could be something that's, 99.5% water, but just a little bit of alcohol in it for sterilization purposes. So there's no reason to read into it more than that. I also think it's a little silly to look at ancient supplies of water and say they never used alcohol, because that just doesn't make any sense.
Well, does it grape, if they didn't have a way to keep the grape juice, wouldn't it ferment on its own without?
Yeah.
That would depend on storage conditions, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
Sometimes it's just sour.
Now, one way they could keep things cold is they would put, like, you've heard of a wine sack. They would put the wine in the wine sack, and then they would put it in the lake with a weight and put it like 30 feet down where it was cold. And that was one way they kept premium drinks cold. That kind of thing. But that was expensive, not common.
There's only one indication in there that it might be wine.
Right,
That's what, they served the good stuff first
right.
Yes.
But even then,
and the bad stuff last.
right. And again, I think it's silly to say there was zero alcohol at all, because again, just ancient times, it was the only way they could keep things clean. So that's what they used. And again, we're talking about very small volume necessarily. Could have been higher volume, not saying it couldn't have been, but I also think it's silly to say zero, because that just doesn't make any sense based on understandings of ancient water supplies.
It's been debated a long time, hasn't it?
Yep, and it's going to stay that way. I'm not going to solve it. So, and usually, and it isn't usually the case that one extreme or the other is wrong. I mean, truth's always somewhere in the middle. So, all right. So this is taking a while. And then let's keep reading. Let's do verses 8 and 9 and 10.
And he said to them, draw some out now and take it to the head waiter. So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom. And the groom said to him, every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until...
All right. So a happy ending to a stressful story. And Jesus did it without taking credit. And even though the servants knew what happened, they obviously didn't tell anybody. Now, if you had multiple servants and they weren't telling anybody, what are the chances Jesus told them don't tell anybody? Pretty high. Yeah. Because if people aren't told not to talk, what do people do? Talk. And even if you tell them not to talk, what do they tend to do? Talk. So that's what I always find humorous when somebody's like, oh, I'm afraid of what other people will think. I'm like, they're already thinking it. They're already talking about it. You just don't want to acknowledge it. That's what people do. You know, like you should not be in leadership unless you're willing to let people talk about you all the time. Just let it go. Let it happen. And either one of two things will happen. Something is true and bad. You need to deal with it, or it's false and stupid and they'll look dumb. You don't need to do anything, you know. But this is what Jesus apparently told them not to do, and so they didn't. And the head waiter says here that called the bridegroom exclaimed his praise for what they have done. And then it says, verse 11. Somebody want to read that? And just verse 11.
This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
Okay. Now this verse seems to indicate this was the first miracle. Again, is it the first recorded miracle or the first actual miracle? It would seem like it would just be the first recorded one, because otherwise why would Mary know what she knows that he could do these kind of things? But at the same time, you could also just read it and say, this was the beginning.
So who were the disciples with him in verse 2?
Well, if you go back to chapter 1, he's already called Peter and Andrew and Nathaniel and Philip, and so he's already got some disciples.
Fish would have been a miracle.
Do what?
The fish, the boat. Wouldn't that be the first miracle then?
That when they couldn't catch anything in the lake,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
and he helped.
right, yep. Don't know what to tell you at the moment.
Sorry, Josh.
Thank you, Alex, for questioning all my character there. No, I'm kidding. It's okay.
Well, that's what I've always been taught.
The only thing I could say to that is possibly what we read in chapter 1 when it says that he was told that Jesus was the Messiah, because Andrew told Simon that maybe Simon wasn't yet convinced, and that miracle happened after this. So that's a possibility. All righty. Somebody read verse 12.
As he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days.
Okay. So Jesus has this opening miracle here, and it's done in private. And you will see towards the beginning of Jesus' ministry, as you probably already know, is that he slowly reveals who he is over time, and slowly the miracles become more and more public. At first, they're more private, and later on, they become more and more public. And what he says about himself becomes more and more revealing over time. Like he didn't tell anybody at the very beginning he was the Christ, but that comes out over time, and then eventually he's public about it. Go ahead, Ken.
Was his dad still alive?
Joseph?
Joseph?
It doesn't seem like it.
No.
It seems like he died before Jesus' ministry began.
I mean, it never says anything about him.
The average longevity of that era was between 50 and 55 years old. That's how long the average person lived at that time. Now, that seems extraordinarily short by modern standards, but there are certain countries in Africa where it's below 30. So it's still not uncommon, or at least not unheard of.
And he was older when he and Mary.
Yeah.
Right,
Yep.
anyway.
Yep. So, yep. Lots of reasons you could die young back then. Most commonly disease and sanitation. In fact, one phrase I heard studying history when I was reading a book one time said that if you look at just pure numbers, plumbers have saved more lives than doctors, because modern sanitation made more difference than any medical intervention ever did. So just washing your hands, the revolution that was between the Civil War and World War I was huge.
And the people who suggested it were nearly.
Oh yeah, lambasted. Yeah.
Oh,
And to this day, it's hard to get some people to make them wash their hands, you know?
That's for sure.
Or if you go to church camp with the rest of us, you can discover how young boys never want to shower or wash their hands under any circumstance.
Pool does not count as a shower.
Right. In fact, that's gross, you know? Yeah. Making everybody else swim in everybody else's filth. Yeah, good times. All righty. So notice they went to Capernaum, which wasn't too far away, and then they stayed there for a few days. And there's these breaks that you have in Jesus' ministry from time to time, where he'll go somewhere and it says he spends a few days, or he goes away by himself for the evening. As his ministry progresses, his demands will increase dramatically. You know, at the beginning here, it's just his disciples and a few others and private miracles, but it won't be long from now where he's got thousands of people looking for him at all given times. And once you got that kind of an entourage, it's really hard to get away. All right, well, let's keep reading. Let's do verses 13 and 14.
The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables.
Okay, so Jesus goes from Cana to Capernaum to Jerusalem. And remember, everybody's got to walk. And I've been learning to walk more. Virgil's been helping me out. And I'm averaging 3 to 4 miles a day right now.
Oh my goodness.
But back then, you walked everywhere. You know how many times I've walked to church from my house 3 blocks away in the 10 years I've been here?
3?
Maybe.
I do that every day, multiple times a day.
Yeah. Although I'm thinking with gas prices, maybe I should walk, you know, that'd be good. But so there, you know, he's walking up there, the disciples are with him, and he discovers something he's not very happy about. Now, do you think this has been going on for a while? Yeah. Normally, things like this start out small, and over time people get used to it, and then it grows into a big, big problem. I imagine, and it's hard to get any history on this, I tried, but I imagine that what happened was somebody proposed the idea, hey, some of these people travel from outside of town, and bringing their sacrifice with them is a big, you know, it's a problem. So how about we just have them here ready to buy when they get here? So you could see how that might be founded with good intentions. In fact, a lot of really terrible things come from good intentions. As you say, you know, good intentions pave the road to hell. So, of course, what happened over time is that somebody decided to exploit this good intention and turn it into a profit-making business, and then eventually a business of pure extortion. And where they were doing the selling was in the Gentile court. Now, you probably all know this, but in the temple court, you had the inner court, which was for the average Jew, and you had the outer court, which was for any Gentile converts. Now, that's not the way God set it up in the Old Testament. That's important to understand. In the Old Testament, anybody who was faithful to God, anybody who converted to Judaism, was welcome in the inner court. They made up the outer court. They created the racist environment. And then they decided, well, the Gentiles don't even deserve their own court. We're just going to turn it into a business bazaar. And so that's what happened here. And this is why Jesus is so upset. It's not just because they're selling in the temple and turning God's house into a place of extortion, but they're also discriminating against people who had every right to be there. And God had not excluded them. How do you think God feels when he's included somebody, but we've excluded them?
Pretty bad.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it'd be like your mom inviting somebody over for dinner, but then you telling that person, but I don't want you there. How's your mom going to respond to you? Pretty badly. Right. Same thing. So that's why Jesus is so upset. And notice verse 15, he does not waste any time. Does somebody want to read verse 15?
Made a scourge of the cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables.
Okay. Now it takes a little bit to build a scourge of cords. And the disciples have never seen Jesus angry before, at least not that we know of. And remember, his first miracle is definitely one that's peaceful and nothing but beneficial to everybody. And so here comes Jesus, and he sees this, and his reaction is violent. And he takes time to build a scourge of cords. And then he goes whipping about, driving everybody out. Now, Jesus has one advantage we don't. He can read the hearts and minds of people at any given time. It even says that in the scriptures. Remember, he knew the mind of the Pharisees, or he knew the mind of the scribes. He can read our thoughts, and he knows the intentions of our heart. So I think this is one of those situations where we can say with confidence that Jesus did not need to reason with them, because he knew everybody who had the gall to be there was an extortionist. They were evil people, and they just didn't belong there at all. And this is a unique property God has. We can't do that. And let me give you evidence that we can't do that. Anybody here been married for a little while? Yeah? Okay. All right. Do you still know what your spouse is thinking at all times? No. No, you don't. Right. You could be married to somebody your whole life and still wonder at times, what are they thinking? Or what Kara likes to ask me is, what are you scheming? And because I'm coming up with ideas all the time. And she's finally learned after 14 years that I'm a brainstormer. Like, I might throw out an idea. That doesn't mean I believe in it. I just want to see what sticks. I just want to see what you think. And I'm just trying to figure it out. And, a lot of people aren't brainstormers, so they think when you suggest something, you endorse it. So it's taken her a long time to realize I'm not saying something I want to do. I just want to see what you think.
But even if you tell them what you think, it's like, I said something to Kenny the other night about something that I thought, and he said, well, why in the world would you think that?
And you've been married how long now?
40 years.
There you go. Yeah. So this is something Jesus uniquely has. So I think we can come to the conclusion here that everybody was a bad actor, and they could not be reasoned with. Do you think Jesus could have went up to them and said, did you know you're taking advantage of people and you shouldn't be here? What would they have said?
They laughed at him.
Yeah. They wouldn't have taken him seriously. Now, I am definitely the kind of person who will try every diplomatic way I can to handle something before I lose it. That's just my personality. And I definitely don't try to go there very often. And so Jesus here, again, is in a unique position. He alone can read somebody's hearts and mind before anybody else can. And so he alone has the right to do what was done here. Because you notice there's no other story like this in the Bible from an apostle or from the church. This is not an example of when you're mad at church, make out a whip and beat people with it. So let's read verse 16.
And to those who were selling the doves, he said, take these things away and stop making my Father's house a place of business.
Okay. So Jesus speaks after he drives them out, and he specifically says to the ones selling the doves, take these things away. Now, you probably know the doves was the lowest sacrifice accepted at the temple. And so this was for the poorest of people who wanted to worship. You could buy 2 doves for about a day or two's pay back then. Now, that sounds like a lot of money to us, of course, but when you're the poorest of poor and you're a shepherd and there's no minimum wage laws and there's no fair market, so to speak, then, every penny counts, and it was still very expensive. And, of course, they would be charging way above market value anyway, because they would tell you whatever you brought wasn't good enough and you had to buy what they had to sell because, the Pharisees had approved of it. And so he's especially mad at those who are taking advantage of the poor people. Now, it says in verse 17 that his disciples remember that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. This is, of course, a quote from the Old Testament. There's another verse that it makes me think about, and that's the verse where Jesus talks, or God is speaking, and he says, I desire mercy more than sacrifice. And the last thing these people were showing people was mercy. Otherwise, if you worship is good, but if you don't worship with the heart that God wants you to have, it doesn't matter. The Pharisees did all the worship you could possibly want, but it was empty. I mean, Jesus even called them children of Satan at one point. You think John the Baptist was bad calling them vipers? Go ahead.
It wouldn't surprise me if good enough that they kept them and then in a few days put them back out. And so
I'm
they
sure.
knew them people would be gone.
Yep.
And
Yep.
What would they do if they couldn't afford to buy any?
They weren't allowed to enter the temple. It was basically an admission fee. Yeah. They had turned the whole worship of God into a market. Yeah. Now let's talk about something, and this is the discussion I want to have, not a debate, okay? Because I've had people come up to me and say, well, you can't sell anything in the church based on this story. Now, is that the lesson of the story, or is there another lesson that the scripture is trying to teach us here? I just want to open it up to the floor. Get a discussion, not a debate.
I think another.
Another one? What would that be?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay. It's a place of worship and not business. It's not a place to take advantage of people. It's also a place where everybody's on equal footing. Go ahead.
I don't think we should sell things in the church. I think we're not trusting in God. God's going to give our hearts. I feel like we should give what we can, what He would want us to.
Okay, so that's
And
interesting.
we're not trusting in Him. And we
Okay.
need to have a fundraiser.
Okay, well, that's one way of looking at it, and I agree with you generally there. Another way to look at it is, and this is a discussion we've had, and again, I'm just having a discussion, I'm not making policy, is a kid is selling something for Girl Scouts, and they want to, yeah, that question has been brought up, you know? Well, and of course, the difference is there is it's not for the church. The church is not trying to raise money outside of itself. And that kid is obviously not in leadership trying to extort anybody, you know. Like one idea, and I've never brought it up, and I probably never will because I don't want to cause trouble, but one thing that I've always thought would be kind of cool is anybody who runs a business in church, we'd have just like a little bulletin board, and they could stick their card up there, and then if you need something, you would know who to go to, you know. And that's just a thought I've had, but I've never brought it up, and I'm not trying to bring it up. But at the same time, I get where people are coming from with this passage, you know. What else?
if you're hit every week by some kid or something wanting you to buy something, you know, people would probably not even come, you know, because
Sure.
of that.
Yeah. So there's that perspective. Yep. Any other thoughts on this? It's one of these debates, by the way, that will never end. You know, I'm definitely with Linda when it comes to the church should not be raising money outside of itself. We should be self-sufficient. Yeah, I do agree with that for sure. Go
But
ahead.
as far as the kids going to NYR,
Right.
if there's a opportunity for them as a group to go do something to make money to help provide their way,
Yeah.
that's to me that's different.
Yeah. It's not for profit.
And
Yeah.
you know, but
Just to help the child.
still, if you're selling stuff in the church for NYR, hitting you up every week, you know, then I'm kind of
You can get border on that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
If a farmer had something to say, want to go pick up a field of rocks, you know, if you get a bunch of kids together, you go out there and they make some money, fine, you know.
Right.
And
That was common when I was a kid. I remember painting fences to go to CIY. And I remember one time, because I was not a farming kid, okay, I got sent out to a farm to paint a fence, and it was electric, and nobody told me. Well, I was painting the post. There was a post up and down,
And then there was a wire going.
And there was a wire. I didn't know. And I just started brushing. And then before I knew it, I was 3 feet on my backside behind me. And I walked in the house and I just got shocked out of my mind. They're like, oh, we forgot to turn that off. It's like, thanks for that. Glad I don't have AFib. Yeah, so, all right, good times.
What about,
Oh, go ahead. It's fine.
I think that, I really like the idea of there being opportunities for the members of church to make donations.
Yeah.
Like especially with kids going places and things, because, my kids whenever, they went to a lot of great opportunities, NYR and camps and stuff like that. And, we were able to do that. And a lot of families, it's a little more difficult. They got a lot of kids and camp may not be real great and kids kind of need, and I would, I love the opportunity to be able to help with something like that by making a donation. So
Sure, yeah.
I think that is a really good thing, just making that open for people if they wish to make donations.
Sure, yeah. All right. I'm glad everybody's staying cool. It's good.
Rowena and Tammy were selling those cards.
Mm-hmm.
And that was for,
NYR fundraiser or any other youth function. Yep. Yep. And that really just, they're actually donating the materials. So, they're not just nonprofit, they're unprofit. So, yeah. So actually the sales have been so good. They're like, we kind of hope it slows down. It's getting kind of expensive. I'm like, that's the problem with doing a good job. Yeah. I always told my kids, once you're good at something, you're in demand. So that's the whole problem, right? All right. So Jesus fulfills a prophecy in verse 17. Somebody read verses 18 and 19.
And then what miraculous sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this? Jesus answered to them, destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days.
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. So I understand the Jews asking this question. Remember, Jesus is very early on in his ministry. He has not established who he is to the public yet. And then for a guy to just go in there and do what Jesus did, wouldn't you ask, who gave you the right to do this? That's a reasonable question. Not every time Jesus is questioned is it out of bad faith. Now, a lot of the times it is, but not every time. And I think they have the right to ask this question. And Jesus' answer is a little cryptic. Destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now, we've talked about before how parables are supposed to be riddles. And riddle is not a game word like it is in English. Riddle in the ancient times was designed to sort out serious students from non-serious students. So if the Jews asking here were Jewish authorities, which I imagine they were, they should have recognized that Jesus' answer was in the form of a riddle. Because if he's saying, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up, well, how is that even possible? And that's exactly what they ask in the next question. It took 46 years to build this temple and you will raise it up in 3 days. And then verse 21, but he was speaking of the temple of his body. So Jesus' answer being cryptic, if this was a serious student of the word asking this question at all, they should have immediately recognized it as a riddle. And that Jesus was basically asking them, do you really want to know? Are you serious? That's what it would have been in that culture. Now, here in Western culture, especially in the 21st century, we really appreciate just straight answers. You ask a question, you just want the answer. But that is not how they spoke in their era. When you gave a straight answer, it was only over something that wasn't all that serious. When you gave a cryptic answer or a riddle-like answer, you were asking the person asking you, do you really want to know? Are you serious? And it seems like to me they were not serious because of their answer. It took 46 years to build this temple and you will raise it up in 3 days. They already knew that was impossible. And that's not what Jesus was even talking about. But he was also talking about something that, at least for human beings, is impossible, which is raising from the dead without the help of God. Now, you remember the Pharisees believed in resurrection, but Sadducees did not. And we don't know here if it was Pharisees or Sadducees or scribes or temple teachers of the law who was asking this question. It could have been a variety of those people, and his answer would have divided them. And we'll read some more later on in the book of John, where Jesus says specifically, some of the things I say and do are meant to divide people, not to be divisive, but to separate the serious from the non-serious, to separate those who really do want to follow God and those who just want to pay lip service to God. And don't we all know people who are in both of those camps? People who really want to serve God and people who just pay lip service? So that's the reason for Jesus' cryptic answer here, is he was really asking them, are you serious? Do you really want to know? It's almost like a parent with a child. I know there are times where my children have asked me a question, and I know the answer is heavy. And I have to determine in my own mind, are they ready for this answer? You know, I've believed in sort of a controlled trauma version of parenting, where I let them experience, to a degree, failure, and to a degree, the evils of the world, because I don't want them to be surprised as adults that the world is evil and chaotic. They have to know how to navigate that. But even at 19 with Lane and Harley at 18 and Jonathan at 16, there's still things I'm revealing to them and will continue to. And Jesus does the same thing for us. He reveals, unfolds over time, the will of God. All right. Well, we're at 2 o'clock, and I don't really want to go any further than that because it's heavier subject material, especially John chapter 3, probably the most famous chapter in the whole Bible. So that'll easily take up the hour next week. Anybody else have any thoughts, questions, or comments?
Okay. If they would have destroyed that temple, couldn't have Jesus put it back together?
Well, he could have, but they didn't know that.
What he was
Right.
sent to do, but I mean, he had the power that if he could have,
Yeah, and in fact, for God, 3 days is a long time to do anything.
Right.
Yeah. You think about creation, how about all the animals in one day? All the plants in one day. And God taking 3 days to build a temple. That's slow pace for him, I put shelving up in my shed and it took a whole day,
How good the place is he's prepared for us. It's been thousands of years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
I hope mine doesn't have an outhouse. Yeah. All right. We'll end on that note because that's appropriate. Okay. Perfect. Alex, would you close out with prayer?
Yeah. Lord, thank you for allowing us to be able to come to Daytimers today. Thank you for the people who made the great food, allowing us to be able to partake in that. And thank you for the Bible study that Josh given us. And thank you, Jesus, for coming, dying on the cross to forgive our sins. Love you. Jesus Christ, name.